Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup. My name is Tunde Alabi. Thank you for joining us. The Labour leader Ed Miliband has accused the Prime Minister of failing to deliver on his electoral promise to cut down on net migration. Mr. Miliband made the accusation during this week Prime Minister Question Time.
Mr. Speaker, before the last election, the Prime Minister made a no ifs, no buts promise on immigration. Can he remind the House exactly what that promise was?
Well, we promised to cut net migration. We've cut it from outside the European Union, but it's increased from inside the European Union, not least because we've created more jobs than the rest of the European Union put together.
He was rather coy about his precise promise, Mr. Speaker. It was in his contract with the British people. Net migration cut to the tens of thousands. But now it's at 298,000, higher than when he took office. And here's what he said in the contract. Here's what he said. If we don't deliver our side of the bargain, vote us out in 5 years' time. When he said that, did he mean it?
Well, there are two reasons for high migration. One is the growth of our economy, and the other is that our benefit system allows people to access that benefit system straight away. I say, let's keep the strong economy, let's change the benefit system. He wants to keep the benefit system and trash the economy.
Mr. Speaker, I do have to say to him, his promise on immigration makes the Deputy Prime Minister's promise on tuition fees look like the model of integrity. If he can break so spectacularly a solemn promise on a fundamentally important issue, why on earth should anyone believe any of his election promises this time?
Well, I'm glad he mentions the document. I brought it with me. I have, as you'd say, Mr. Speaker, procured a copy for the interests of the House, and I'd like to run through it. Here are the commitments we made. We will protect pensions. We protected pensions. We will train 4,000 Sure Start health visitors. We've trained 4,000 Sure Start health visitors. We will protect free TV licences for the over 75s and keep free eye tests for pensioners. We kept that promise. There's plenty. I've got all day, Mr. Speaker. I think these are very important. It says we'll keep the winter fuel allowance. We kept the winter fuel allowance. It says that we will ensure cancer patients get the treatments they need. We've made sure that happened. But, Mr. Speaker, there's lots more. There's lots more. Here we are. Let's keep going. Plenty of time. We will increase health spending every year. We've increased health spending every year. We'll introduce a married couples tax allowance. We've introduced a married couples tax allowance. We'll increase the basic state pension. We've increased the basic state pension. There's plenty more, Mr. Speaker. These are commitments made, commitments kept. What a contrast. What a...
Mr. Miliband.
So, Mr. Speaker, so now we know you can't believe the promise on immigration from the leader of the Conservative Party. It's not worth the paper. It's not worth the paper it's written on. Now,
order. Can I just ask the House? Order. Can I just ask the House to have some regard for the views of the public about our behaviour, given that we'll be seeking their support in the weeks ahead? It's quite straightforward, really. Ed Miliband.
They're laughing about his broken promise on immigration. Now, let's ask him again. He promised net migration in the tens of thousands. Will he now admit that he has broken that promise, yes or no?
I've been very clear. We cut migration from outside the EU, but we've seen it rise inside the EU. We've got a plan to deal with that. But he talks about the commitments. Mr. Speaker, I've got a few more. It says we'll cut wasteful spending. We've cut wasteful spending. It says we'll reduce carbon emissions. We reduced carbon emissions. It says we'll have 400,000 apprentices. We've broken that promise. We've had 2 million apprentices. But, Mr. Speaker, it is election time. We're all getting to think about leaflets. I've got a little question. Apparently, you can go round to his office and he stands on a soapbox to make him look a little bit taller. Let's ask, how many people are going to put the Leader of the Opposition on their leaflets? Come on, hands up! Hands up! Come on, guys. Here we are. I think that's enough about leaflets for now.
Mr. Speaker, so it's all about leadership. Well, there's a very excellent, great, and there's a very good chance to discuss these issues. The broadcasters have proposed a live head-to-head debate between the Prime Minister and me on the 30th of April, a week before polling day. I will be at that debate. Will he be at that debate?
It is all about leadership, Mr. Speaker, and we see no leadership from the party opposite. What's interesting, Mr. Speaker, we're having a debate now, and they cannot talk about the economy. They can't talk about jobs because there are more jobs being created. They can't talk about growth because growth is going up. They can't even talk about living standards because of the breakthrough report today showing living standards are back at their pre-crisis peak. I say, let's have these debates. Let's get on with them before the election.
Okay, if he wants an additional debate between me and him before the election, I'm very happy to agree to it. But the broadcasters have set a date. He says the election is all about me and him, but the one thing he wants to avoid is a TV debate between me and him. I'll give him another chance. I'll be there on April the 30th, a debate between me and him. Will he be there, yes or no?
He's now given up on the 7-corner debates. He doesn't want to debate with the Greens anymore. Yeah. He watched the press conference. We all thought it was a car crash. He probably thought it was a masterclass. We're having a debate now, and he can't talk about the economy. He can't talk about jobs. He can't talk about living standards. He can't talk about what we've done for our economy. And the reason why, he's got no leadership whatsoever. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, we have a recovering economy, and we mustn't let Labour wreck it.
Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked the U.S. Congress and government to stand with Israel shoulder to shoulder in their quest to stop Iran from waging extermination war on it and becoming a warlord in the Middle East.
Today, the Jewish people face another attempt by yet another Persian potentate to destroy us. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, spews the oldest hatred of anti-Semitism with the newest technology. He tweets that Israel must be annihilated. He tweets. You know, in Iran, there isn't exactly free internet. But he tweets in English that Israel must be destroyed. For those who believe that Iran threatens the Jewish state, but not the Jewish people, listen to Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, Iran's chief terrorist proxy. He said, "If all the Jews gather in Israel, it will save us the trouble of chasing them down around the world." But Iran's regime is not merely a Jewish problem, any more than the Nazi regime was merely a Jewish problem. The 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis were but a fraction of the 60 million people killed in World War II.
While expressing his fears at the way Iran was growing unchecked and his threats against the Jewish people, the state of Israel, and indeed the rest of the world, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Iran is a threat to the entire world if its alarming growth is not controlled.
Too, Iran's regime poses a grave threat not only to Israel, but also to the peace of the entire world. To understand just how dangerous Iran would be with nuclear weapons, we must fully understand the nature of the regime. The people of Iran are very talented people. They're heirs to one of the world's great civilizations. But in 1979, they were hijacked by religious zealots who imposed on them immediately a dark and brutal dictatorship. That year, the zealots drafted a constitution, a new one for Iran. It directed the Revolutionary Guards not only to protect Iran's borders, but also to fulfill the ideological mission of jihad. The regime's founder, Ayatollah Khomeini, exhorted his followers to export the revolution throughout the world. I'm standing here in Washington, D.C., and the difference is so stark. America's founding document promises life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Iran's founding document pledges death, tyranny, and the pursuit of jihad. And as states are collapsing across the Middle East, Iran is charging into the void to do just that. Iran's goons in Gaza, its lackeys in Lebanon, its Revolutionary Guards on the Golan Heights are clutching Israel with three tentacles of terror. Backed by Iran, Assad is slaughtering Syrians. Backed by Iran, Shiite militias are rampaging through Iraq. Backed by Iran, Houthis are seizing control of Yemen, threatening the strategic straits at the mouth of the Red Sea. Along with the Straits of Hormuz, that would give Iran a second choke point on the world's oil supply. Just last week, near Hormuz, Iran carried out a military exercise blowing up a mock U.S. aircraft carrier. That's just last week, while they're having nuclear talks with the United States. But unfortunately, for the last 36 years, Iran's attacks against the United States have been anything but mock, and the targets have been all too real. Iran took dozens of Americans hostage in Tehran, murdered hundreds of American soldiers, Marines in Beirut, and was responsible for killing and maiming thousands of American servicemen and women in Iraq and Afghanistan. Beyond the Middle East, Iran attacks America and its allies through its global terror network. It blew up the Jewish Community Center and the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. It helped al-Qaeda bomb U.S. embassies in Africa. It even attempted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador right here in Washington, D.C. In the Middle East, Iran now dominates 4 Arab capitals: Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, and Sana'a. And if Iran's aggression is left unchecked, more will surely follow. So at a time when many hope that Iran will join the community of nations, Iran is busy gobbling up the nations. We must all stand together to stop Iran's march of conquest, subjugation, and terror.
In the meantime, U.S. President Barack Obama has said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Wednesday speech at the U.S. Congress has not offered any hope and solution to the Iranian crisis. President Obama disclosed this while receiving the Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter. Obama said Mr. Netanyahu has not offered any better solution than the one being currently pursued with Iran.
One issue that we will be discussing is Iran, and obviously that's been a topic of great interest today. So let me just make a couple of comments on that. I did not have a chance to watch Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. I was on a video conference with our European partners with respect to Ukraine. I did have a chance to take a look at the transcript, and as far as I can tell, there was nothing new. The Prime Minister, I think, appropriately pointed out that the bond between the United States and America is unbreakable, and on that point I thoroughly agree. He also pointed out that Iran has been a dangerous regime and continues to engage in activities that are contrary to the interests of the United States, to Israel, and to the region. And on that, we agree. He also pointed out the fact that Iran has repeatedly threatened Israel and engaged in the most venomous of anti-Semitic statements, and no one can dispute that. But on the core issue, which is how do we prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, which would make it far more dangerous and would give it scope for even greater action in the region, the Prime Minister didn't offer any viable alternatives. So let's be clear about what exactly the central concern should be, both for the United States and for Israel. I've said since before I became president that one of my primary goals in foreign policy would be preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And with the help of Congress and our international partners, we constructed an extraordinarily effective sanctions regime that pressured Iran to come to the table to negotiate in a serious fashion. They have now been negotiating over the last year, and during that period, Iran has, in fact, frozen its program, rolled back some of its most dangerous, highly enriched uranium, and subjected itself to the kinds of verifications and inspections that we had not previously seen. Keep in mind that when we shaped that interim deal, Prime Minister Netanyahu made almost the precise same speech about how dangerous that deal was going to be. And yet, over a year later, even Israeli intelligence officers, and in some cases members of the Israeli government, have to acknowledge that, in fact, it has kept Iran from further pursuing its nuclear program. Now, the deal that we are trying to negotiate, that is not yet completed, would cut off the different pathways for Iran to advance its nuclear capabilities. It would roll back some elements of its program. It would ensure that it did not have what we call a breakout capacity that was shorter than a year's time. And it would subject Iran to the most vigorous inspections and verifications regimes that have ever been put in place. Now, the alternative that the Prime Minister offers is no deal, in which case Iran will immediately begin once again pursuing its nuclear program, accelerate its nuclear program, without us having any insight into what they're doing, and without constraint. And his essential argument is that if we just double down on sanctions, Iran won't want to do that. Well, we have evidence from the past decade that sanctions alone are not sufficient to prevent Iran from pursuing its nuclear ambitions. And if it, in fact, does not have some sense that sanctions will be removed, it will not have an interest in avoiding the path that it's currently on. So the bottom line is this. We don't yet have a deal. It may be that Iran cannot say yes to a good deal. I have repeatedly said that I would rather have no deal than a bad deal. But if we're successful in negotiating, then in fact this will be the best deal possible to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Nothing else comes close. Sanctions won't do it. Even military action would not be as successful as the deal that we have put forward. And I think it is very important not to be distracted by the nature of the Iranian regime's ambitions when it comes to territory or terrorism, all issues which we share a concern with Israel about and are working consistently with Israel on. Because we know that if, in fact, they obtained a nuclear weapon, all those problems would be worse. So we're staying focused on the central issue here. How do we prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? The path that we've proposed, if successful, by far is the best way to do that. That's demonstrable. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has not offered any kind of viable alternative that would achieve the same verifiable mechanism to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
From politics to economy, to business, technology, the totality of what makes man is what we bring to you here on this Punch. We give you the information that you need, from business to economy, to politics, to technology. And that's what we do here on this Punch, from the beginning to the end. And that is why we are here. Keep watching this Punch from Ben Television. And today, I'll be your host. This is all we have for you on News Roundup this week, and thank you for being part of it. My name is Tony Alabi. To have a very beautiful week ahead of you. Bye.